Not all great horror games need jump scares, Tetris-like inventory systems, virtual reality modes. Some of them keep it quite simple, but still happen to be amazing, and that's how I feel about Silent Hill 2. It's more of a psychological horror game. It's about the atmosphere, it's about the feel, it's about the story, and it does all that amazingly. It's absolutely incredible. It's been a long time since it came out. I don't have rose-tinted glasses. I only played it for the first time 7 or 8 years ago, and I really appreciated it. Something about the way they executed, the fog, the visuals, even though it's an old game, it's a PS2 title originally, it still looks good, and it feels great. The story just holds up so well that it still feels like a modern game to some degree. I'm bringing this up now because, as many know, we've got a remake in the works from Konami, from Bloober Team, who are handling the development. And the other day, it got me thinking, because some trophies have leaked, some achievements have leaked, and there's only 12 of them. Now, achievements, do they really matter? I don't think so. I don't think anyone really cares unless you're super addicted to the dopamine hit of a new one popping. Aside from that, they don't mean a lot for the quality of a game. But 12 is a small number. Most modern AAA games, they have something like 40 or 50, often a mixture of story moments progressing in the game, and then usually some combat, sort of gameplay-focused ones as well. Clearly not the case with the 12 that the Silent Hill 2 remake have. They all look to be story-related. So I am wondering, is this going to feel like a AAA experience? Is it going to match the Resident Evil remakes in terms of scope and sort of quality and feel overall? Again, I know they're very different games in terms of what they're trying to achieve, but it doesn't matter. People are going to compare them. Back in the early 2000s, when both series were coming out around the same time, they were both in their peaks, people compared them regardless of the fact that they were stylistically very different. One was more focused on combat than the other, one was more serious than the other, all of that. Now, there's a few things here. Bloober Team may just not care about achievements. They're focusing very much on the game first, and they don't care about little gimmicks and little combat moments, gameplay moments that give you a little pop in the end of your screen to say achievement unlocked. They just might not care about that. That is totally fine. If that's the case and it's still a full-length game, it's a genuine gameplay experience that at least feels like the original, I would not care whatsoever. But the alternative is this is, in some ways, a bit of an indie game with great-looking graphics. The actual gameplay could be very limited. I wouldn't feel that's the end of the world. If they can get the story right, they execute that well, there's good visuals that focus on the atmosphere, it's not just about being a graphical showcase, it does have that same tone that the original captured. If they get those two things right, visuals, atmosphere, if we throw something else in, we'll say the story, executing that properly, then I'll be okay with it. I can live without really, really good gameplay that expands on what the original had. The original Silent Hill 2, the gameplay is nothing special. I think I played it for the first time barely firing a gun. I was just whacking enemies. I didn't care. I was just, get these enemies out of the way. I want to continue in the story. I want to find out what happens next. I want to explore these areas because the atmosphere is incredible. So the combat, I can live without it, but the game is clearly going to have some sort of combat. So I hope that they can at least get that right, whatever it is. I referred to it maybe feeling like an indie game earlier, and what I mean by that is Bloober Team's games are mostly walking simulators. They were responsible for the Layers of Fear series. If you've played them, I got into them while having a really good run of horror titles. I'd played The Outlasts. I'd played Visage, which was an incredible indie horror title. There were some other ones thrown in there, the modern Resident Evil titles. I was enjoying them, and I saw Layers of Fear among them in sort of suggested games, similar titles. Downloaded, played the first Layers of Fear, and I thought it was a bit of a joke. There was nothing about it that grabbed me. I'm okay with walking simulators. If they get the style right and it hooks me, good story, good atmosphere, then I'll absolutely play it. I'm not going to judge it and automatically consider it crap because it doesn't have combat or specific gameplay loops. But there was nothing about Layers of Fear that I thought was really good. It had this gimmick that they repeated over and over, where you'll be walking down a corridor, you'll turn around, and things will have changed. What was behind you, the door, that's not a door anymore, it's an empty black wall, or there's some creepy picture. It sounds okay, but it's not executed very well. I've played other games where I swear they've had the same gimmick, and it's been better. So it's not even an original gimmick, and there's nothing that came out of it that I thought was really good. It got predictable. You would start going somewhere and you're like, oh, I know, I'm going to turn around and you're going to have a surprise for me. It was just that over and over. It wasn't a long game. The voice acting, the narration, I didn't think that was very good. I accounted for the fact that it was a low-budget game, but I still think something like Visage was so much better. It's such a shame that the studio responsible for that game, I think it might have disbanded or they're not really working on anything anymore. So that is a real letdown, because we've had Layers of Fear 1, I didn't even play 2. They did some sort of remake recently, very confusing. I had to sort of look up what even is this. It's a combination of 1 and 2, and I think some new story stuff. And I thought, I didn't even like the first one. I'm not playing this. They released the Medium. That doesn't have combat either. More of that sort of walking sim style with, I think, a few more puzzles and things thrown in. Maybe a bit like Silent Hill 2. I haven't played it. I was turned off it because of Layers of Fear, but I perhaps will play it before Silent Hill 2 Remake comes out, just to get a feel for Bloober Team's style. I think there are a lot of people whose hype just totally went away when they learned about Bloober Team and the fact that they were making the remake. A lot of people have wanted to see a new Silent Hill 2 for the longest time. It's kind of like Final Fantasy VII, where every few years people are talking about it, and you kind of hope it happens, but you kind of hope it doesn't, because you just feel so much can go wrong, and it's really hard to capture that original spirit. And if we see, coming back to those small number of achievements, Bloober Team, they might not be biting off more they can sort of chew, because that was a concern as well, that you're going from a genuine 4 or 5 hour walking simulator to a game with combat, with really big story moments, a lot that you've got to get right. And maybe it isn't a really ambitious experience. Maybe it really is just the story, some combat moments, Pyramid Head, the boss, all of that sort of stuff. And it isn't sort of a one-for-one remake. It might just be capturing the story, a smaller experience. Maybe it's fair to have those expectations. I think it's for the best, because when it comes out, there will be a lot of people who immediately hate it when it's not quite the same as the original. That's just a foregone conclusion. So perhaps that's the best. From here, I'm not expecting the world from anything Bloober Team does. So I am starting to think about Silent Hill F, which is being seen as the next genuine entry in the series. Obviously, Silent Hill has had a long run of games, many of them being very middling. Basically, anything from Silent Hill 4 onwards has been seen as not very good. There's a few titles like Downpour. I think that might be the latest genuine original one. Some people try and give that one the benefit of the doubt, but mostly people just consider them garbage. So Silent Hill F, what does the F stand for? I could make a lame joke. I could just consider it standing for first. I've seen that thrown around. It's the first chronologically in the series. Maybe that's interesting. I didn't mind that they went for a different style. The original trailer, it doesn't really look like traditional Silent Hill art. It looked really different. Something from a Fatal Frame or something like that. It didn't quite have that Silent Hill feel. But I'm okay with that if they can deliver a really good story and make it its own. Silent Hill has had so many bad entries that you can't really say, hey, like, this is a really precious IP, you can't stuff this up. That's gone out the door. Don't worry about that, just make a good game. If it's good, a good original story, that's all I really want to see. So maybe not sort of getting my hopes up, because when is the last time Konami actually released something that wasn't a cash grab, it wasn't an absolute joke? That hasn't happened for a long time. So at best, hopefully they can deliver a decent product that isn't focused on ripping off their customers. There is also that streaming Silent Hill game. That's the sort of one that just puts people to sleep. They hear there's a new Silent Hill, and apparently it's only for people streaming it. It seems like some sort of marketing product. It's not a genuine title for audiences to get them interesting. So it seems a bit lame that that's the first one that's actually coming out. I think it might be the end of this month that we're getting a release of some sort, and maybe we'll get some news about the Silent Hill 2 remake, because if the achievements are starting to leak, you assume there's some movement. The fact that I haven't really seen a big marketing push is interesting. There were obviously those original trailers that looked okay. I think most people, even the most skeptical, at least said that they looked decent. But if Silent Hill 2 is releasing this year, which is possible, it does seem odd that we haven't heard a lot. And this year is obviously absolutely packed. It may not be super packed on the horror front necessarily. We had Resident Evil 4 earlier in the year. We've just had Separate Ways. Maybe that plays a part in Konami waiting, and now that we've got the Separate Ways DLC out of the way, Resident Evil, that's maybe on the back burner, and now they can focus on that big push. October, we've got Halloween, let's get Silent Hill 2 Remake out. Maybe that could happen, but I would assume sort of early next year, something like that. But I hope it can help the horror genre, because there's been some series which I've really enjoyed. I mentioned Outlast earlier. I thought Outlast 1 was really good. It was one of my first times with a horror game in a long time when I played that a few years ago. There was Outlast 2, decent, not as good, and now that studio's moved on to multiplayer titles. And I see this often where there's a new horror game releasing and it's some sort of co-op experience. It isn't a single-player, narrative-focused game. And I get that. There can be some challenges around a studio spending 4 years on a 5-hour walking simulator. Maybe some of the audience just watches it on YouTube and doesn't shell out the $30, $40 to actually buy it. They might consider it too short, not justifying the money. But some of these games, they absolutely do justify the spend. I mentioned Visage. It has to be the most scary game I've ever played. And it's not really that long if you know what you're doing. It's a challenging game puzzle-wise, but in terms of content, it's not that long if you know what you're doing. And I can't believe anyone spent money on that game and didn't feel it was worth it. So something like Silent Hill 2, hopefully it can bring to some sort of mainstream, at least gamers who would be open to that sort of title. It opens them up to thinking horror can be different. It doesn't have to be those jump scares. Psychological. It gets you thinking a bit more. It's that tone. It's creepy. It makes you really think. So when it comes out, there's no doubt that I'm going to play it. It's just going to be a question of those expectations. Bloober Team need to prove themselves. I don't think, at least from what I've played, that they've ever released anything of absolute quality, whereas most other mainstream horror studios I've heard of have at least got something that I think is a classic, a modern classic, something that's really good. So we'll see what happens. Will it come out in the next month or so? Will it be next year? We'll just have to wait and see. But thanks so much for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Cheers. Bye.